Okay, so in part two here, we're ready to see how the working memory system might be interacting with the long-term memory system. Again, here's our working memory box, and what's inside would be the contents of working memory. And of course, we might have some goals that we are pursuing. Maybe we're going to do our homework or do our taxes or whatever. And then whatever's in our working memory will be hooked up to the motor system so that we can engage actions to carry out our goals. Now, in the diagram here, we see auditory cortex is engaged in loops of neural activity, visual cortex, loops of neural activity. Even though it's just a dashed line here, we'll call these loops of activity. So we're currently processing what we're hearing and what we're seeing. But the new thing here in this diagram is that whatever the contents of working memory can also act like a search queue for long-term memory. So notice this arrow down here going down to temporal cortex, and we're going to use these little loops of neurons here as icons for stored memories. So here we say the retrieved memory enters working memory, right? So in other words, this is a long-term memory down here, but whatever was currently in the working memory system acted like a trigger to retrieve this particular long-term memory, activated it, and then set up the loops of neural activity to get it into the working memory system. And here we see another one over here that the content, whatever it is right now that's in our working memory, can trigger memories that are associated with what is in currently working memory. And so that new memory now becomes the next content of working memory. So here we're beginning to see the idea that not only is this sort of a temporary storage system for manipulating information, but it also then can access the long-term memory system, and it will tend to activate memories that are related to whatever's going on in your working memory. That sort of makes sense if you think about it. Okay, so now let's consider another fact about the working memory system. It has a limited capacity. And a limited capacity means that our mental experience is serial in nature. In other words, like one thought after another. And to kind of illustrate that serial nature of working memory, we're going to add a little complexity to our diagram. So here again we have our box for working memory, except now we're going to sort of indicate what's in our working memory at time 1, time 2, time 3. And these letters would indicate either goals or thoughts or images or just the contents, the different items in our working memory at a particular time. And you'll notice the letters at T1 are a little bit different than the letters at T2. So first of all, we do have a limited capacity in our working memory system, and this is why our conscious experience is of just sort of one thought after another, or then an image, or then a song comes into our head, and then another thought. We have limitations in the capacity of the system that we are sort of experience as our conscious experience of our minds. The goals here, when we maintain our attention, so vigilance on a goal, we can think of that as an item in our working memory, sort of. So if we sit down to do homework, right, it's kind of in the back of our mind that this is what we want to do, although we don't keep telling ourselves, I'm doing homework, I'm doing homework, I'm doing homework. I mean, if you do have to tell yourself that, then you are having a problem staying focused, but we can think of a goal as occupying some of that capacity in the working memory system. But let's say you're sitting down to read and you're reading some information and it involves ideas C, D, and E, for example, whatever they are. You're reading some history or literature or whatever you're doing, science. So the current contents of your working memory at time 1 involve sort of the goal to be reading and studying, and then whatever it is you're reading about, right? So it's a set of ideas. Well, take a look at what the working memory has at time 2. So you still might have the goal of reading, but now item C has dropped out, and we have D and E, which you were just reading about, but now a new element has entered into working memory. And this might not be something that you were reading, but it was triggered by what you were reading. It's a memory. A new thought came into your mind as a consequence of reading the passage a moment before. So we're going to represent that new thing as item F. Maybe it's a question you have about what you're reading, or maybe it's just something associated with what you're reading, right? It could be just some kind of random thought, but oftentimes it's related to what it is we were just processing a moment ago. And to see how that might work, we'll take a look down. We're going to say down here in the temporal cortex here, we're going to just sort of call this our long-term memory system for now. That's simplification, but and here are our memory items. So here's thought F, or here's item E and D and G and C and N. And the idea is that these individual elements in our memory may be linked either strongly or weakly as a result of our learning experience. So when we learn about the world, we often store information, but we don't just store isolated pieces of information. Lots of things are related, right? So trees have lots of other associated facts about trees that we might learn about as we learn about trees. And so all that information can be linked in our memory system. So the thick line here would represent the idea that memory item E, or information piece E, and that piece of information F are strongly linked in our memory system, whereas information item G and information item F are weakly linked. Now, if we've got this memory architecture as a result of our past learning experience, then we can begin to understand why it is that item F entered our working memory system after reading that passage. So notice working memory at T1, we've got C, D, and E. So memory item C was activated, D was activated, and E was activated at this time. Now if we imagine that when a memory gets activated in the long-term system, it sort of activates other associated items, then we're going to see that item F is going to get strong activation along two pathways. So item E is going to strongly activate F, and item D is going to strongly activate item F. Over here, item C, which was at time 1, it might strongly activate G, but G is not going to get any activation from any other source. So the idea then is, as a result of the particular contents of working memory here, and the nature of the strengths of associations between memories, it's item F that enters working memory at time 2, not item G. So this story about the ways in which memory items are related to each other, either by strong connections or weak connections, can help us understand how it is that associated items come into mind. When we're thinking about something, then something related to it can come into mind. Well, that makes sense from this type of picture. But of course, sometimes item F might be just completely random, and we may not really understand why it is that item F comes into mind after we were just having a seemingly unrelated thought a moment ago. But nevertheless, it may well be a random entrance into working memory, or it may well be that we're just not familiar with the association between item F and items E and D. In other words, we might not sort of be aware that that association was made in the past. And so item F comes into our mind even though we were not aware of the previous learning in which items D and E and F were previously associated. So this gives us a way to sort of understand some of the funny aspects of our mind. That sometimes, well, first of all, we have these just a parade of thoughts, or one thought after another. And lots of times the thoughts are related. Well, that would make sense because what's in our working memory system is activating, searching sort of the long-term memory systems, and it will tend to activate associated, strongly associated items. So that makes sense. But sometimes we get the occasional random thing entering. And it may really be random. In other words, it doesn't have any strong links to what went before. But it also could be the case that we're just not aware of the nature of the memory architecture. We weren't aware that in the past item F was strongly associated with item E and D, and as a result it seems to us like it's coming out of the blue, but really our past experience would make sense of that.